Hi there, you're listening to the Estranged Heart podcast, and I'm your host, Kreed Revere. Welcome back to our returning listeners, and if this is your first time here, thank you for selecting this podcast to listen to. As we begin today's episode, I invite you to grab a cup of coffee or tea, settle in, and listen with an open heart. But first, the regular disclaimer. I am not a licensed therapist or counselor. Nothing within this podcast should be considered or taken as therapy. If you are in need of therapeutic support, such as counseling, please seek out a therapist near you. A couple of announcements and reminders before we begin today's episode. A reminder that the validation workshop will be happening in August, and the start of an online support group for estranged moms will begin in September. If you're interested in either one of those being put on the list for the announcements, please feel free to email me at theestrangedheart@gmail.com, and you'll be the first to hear about that. And validation workshop in August, online support group, Zoom meetings in September for estranged moms. And an announcement, forthcoming is a project that I've been working on behind the scenes for a bit of time. It's something I've wanted to create for a while now, and I'm hopeful that I can get it launched and in a very meaningful and purposeful way. And that is a support group for both estranged adult children and estranged parents, probably not from the same family. But I feel that it is really important for both sides to come together to be able to be seen, heard, and validated, and to learn and grow and evolve and hopefully heal and repair relationships. And I think that this is a great way to do that. If you're interested in participating in this support group for both estranged adult children and estranged parents, please email me. It's a group that will be heavily monitored in the beginning, just because, as we all know, estrangement is a very emotional and sometimes volatile subject, and I want this space to be safe and nurturing and a place where people can be vulnerable in the spirit of learning and growing without fear of judgments and shaming and name calling and things like that. So if you're interested in being a part of that support group, please reach out to me, and I'm happy to connect with you to see if it might be a good fit. And finally, again, another thank you to those of you who continue to support this podcast and the work that I do with estranged moms and estranged adult children. I am super grateful. Some of that is monetary support. Other support happens as well. And I am thankful for each and every one of you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. So let's dive into today's episode, which is titled Conflict Resolution. What did you learn about it, and what did you teach about it? And the two quotes that I have for today, the first one is, to practice the process of conflict resolution, we must completely abandon the goal of getting people to do what we want. And that is by Marshall B. Rosenberg. And the second, I took this from a research paper that was online by Edmonds College in Edmonds, Washington. And it states, conflict arises from differences. It occurs whenever people disagree over their values, motivations, perceptions, ideas, or desires. Sometimes these differences look trivial, but when a conflict triggers strong emotions, a deep personal and relational need is at the core of the problem. A need to feel safe and secure, a need to feel respected and valued, or a need for greater closeness and intimacy. And I think I want to just repeat that one again. There's a lot there, and I think all of it is very, very, very important. So conflict arises from differences. It occurs whenever people disagree over their values, motivations, perceptions, ideas, or desires. Sometimes these differences look trivial, but when a conflict triggers strong emotions and feelings, a deep personal and relational need is at the core of the problem. A need to feel safe and secure, a need to feel respected and valued, and or a need for greater closeness and intimacy. So today's episode came about by way of a post I made in my online support group that I have for estranged moms. And what I posted in regards to conflict resolution was this. Oftentimes parents ask me, specifically moms, why don't these kids just talk to us? Why do they feel they have to walk away? I don't understand why they can't just, and I hear this sometimes, just grow up and have a conversation about whatever it is that's bothering them or their hurts. And whenever I hear that question, the first thing that pops up in my mind is, when and where exactly did they learn how to do that? When and where did they learn how to, quote, just have a conversation about their hurts, end quote? Because I don't know about you, but that's not something I learned at home, and it's not something I learned in school, and it's not something I taught my own children, and it's not something that they necessarily learned in school. So if we don't know how to do something, we generally default to whatever it is we observed or experienced in our worlds. Right, wrong, or indifferent, that's kind of what we default to. So many of us unconsciously teach our children that conflict really is not resolvable. And you may be like, what are you talking about, Kreed? And I'll tell you, we teach our children how to be passive aggressive when it comes to conflict. We teach how to shove it under the rug and pretend everything's okay as a way to deal with conflict. We teach how to be explosive and resolve matters by controlling the narrative. And we teach that maybe things are resolvable as long as they go my way. So, it's challenging to learn how to resolve conflict under the best of circumstances, let alone under the intensity of emotions that surface or lie hidden beneath the surface when it comes to estrangement. Conflict in and of itself elicits a host of emotions and feelings. And we live in a world, let's face it, we live in a world in which we operate on autopilot more often than not, and that we react rather than respond most times. So we have to first learn how to get off of autopilot before we can put any actionable steps into practice. We have to become aware of what is happening, and then we have to get off of, make a conscious effort to get off of autopilot. And we don't know what we don't know. And I hear that a lot from parents. We didn't know about, emotional emotionally healthy, supportive ways to be with our children. We didn't know what we didn't know. Well, I'm here to say your adult children don't know what they don't know either. And if they don't know and haven't been taught how to have healthy conflict resolution, then they don't know how to do it. And we can see estrangement as a result of that. So in my home growing up, my mom was and still is today the type of person that will do just about anything to avoid conflict. Everything should be always what I call the happy, happy, joy, joy. If someone expresses being upset about anything, she will do her level best to turn that around and focus on something else. Bring up a completely different topic to just get away from the conflict. She did that when I was a child, and she still does it today. And she's in her late 70s. My father was very willing to be in conflict. He was in conflict with most everything in his life for a very, very, very long time. And I do believe probably up until his mid-40s before he started to relax a little bit. And even today, he can still be very aggressive in conflict. He doesn't back down from it. He doesn't shy away from it, and he'll get right up in the middle of it. However, that's not necessarily a healthy way, right? Just because you're willing to participate in conflict doesn't mean that you're doing it in a healthy way. And that is what I learned from my dad. So I learned two very different styles of conflict. And as a child, I was very much like my dad. I always, was asking questions and wanted to know why things and didn't understand, and would stomp my feet and cry and have quote unquote fits. And my mother would I can remember her leaning down, not getting down on my level, but leaning over me to be right in my face and tell me, "What is your problem? Stop it. This is not about you." Right? And you're making it all about you. When in reality, I was trying to understand, and I did not have the emotional regulation to be able to figure out how to present that in a way that was quote unquote acceptable for my mom and palatable for her. And so we butted heads all the time, for years, even into adulthood for myself. It was something that I was willing to charge into conflict, and she wanted to go the opposite direction. And so we oftentimes ended up in places where we could not resolve it. And hence the 2 or 3 different times I was estranged from my mom. So I speak from both sides of the fence, right? And then when I had my daughters, my way of handling conflict was my way or the highway. Either you get on board with what I want or you get out. It was that simple. There was no room for discussion. There was no room for compromise. There was no room for anything healthy regarding conflict. And so, again, I was very aggressive like my father and had not learned how to resolve conflict in healthy ways. I was able to do that at work, but the way that I did it at work was just by shutting my mouth and just acquiescing to whatever the other person wanted. There was no sort of compromise involved. So I did not have healthy conflict resolution skills, and I did not teach it to my daughters, and my daughters didn't have that for a very long time. Now they are much better at it than I ever have been, up until this estrangement and really working on myself for that. So I think it's important that we learn, we look back and think about what were we taught when we were children and as an adult in different types of relationships, what type of conflict resolution have we been taught? What did we learn about conflict? Did we learn to be passive aggressive with it? Did we learn to just shove it under the rug and pretend, nothing ever happened and go along with what everyone else wanted? Did we get charge right into conflict and make matters typically worse? Like what did we learn? And then what did we teach our children? Right? And this is another piece that I think is often missed, and that is I hear sometimes parents say, but I taught them how to do this, that, or the other thing. And then further along in the conversation, you hear something along the lines of, well, when my husband and I had conflict, I just went along with whatever he wanted because I just couldn't deal with it, right? And I think to myself, when I hear that, I'm like, we may teach our children one thing, we may say one thing, but our actions are speaking something totally different. And I know my children and a lot of other children, so I'm willing to bet that probably most children don't necessarily do what we say, but they watch what we do and they follow suit. So we can teach them that by speaking, you should do it this way. But if our actions aren't following that, then they're left confused. They're like, well, mom's telling me this, but she's doing this. Or dad said to do it this way, but yet he's over here doing this. So nothing's cohesive. And so they're left not really understanding what they should be doing. And it's easy to default by pattern and experience than it is learning something new and different, right? And children learn really early on how to navigate the world of conflict when it comes to their parents, and how to stay safe. And I don't necessarily mean physically safe, but emotionally safe, in either shutting down or those types of things. I don't know why I never shut down and why I continued to just be, I guess I'm just hard-headed, because I did not do that in an effort to appease my parents, but a lot of children do. So think about how you were taught to deal with conflict, and then how you taught your children, not just by what you said, but what your actions and what you did. And one of the things, as I was prepping for today's episode, I thought to myself, what keeps people in relationships? What's the glue, right? And I had this moment of a slight aha, I guess. And I thought, it's the emotional piece, right? Unless they're, you're young children, that your actual physical survival depends on your parents. But as we grow older and we're not physically dependent on our parents, it's the emotional piece that keeps us tethered or glued to that relationship. So if we don't feel emotionally safe in a relationship, we're certainly not going to feel emotionally safe in conflict in that relationship. And so what is there to keep a person tethered to that relationship if there's not emotional safety and emotional connection? They talk about this in marriage and marriage therapy, right? That each partner needs to feel emotionally safe to be able to be vulnerable enough to come to the table and want to work on things. And I think that this is where our children get off the railroad tracks, so to speak, of this parent-child relationship, is when they don't feel emotionally safe. And so, it's not hard to walk away from something that you don't have an emotional connection to. And I just want you to take yourself out for just a moment out of your relationship with your child and think about the other relationships that you have in your life, right? What keeps you connected? You know, in a work relationship, it's probably money, right? For me, it happens to be the emotional connection because I refuse to work someplace just for $1. It has to hold some other sort of value and meaning to me. But for a lot of people, that's what it is. It's an exchange. I'm in relationship in this workforce in exchange for money. And that's okay. But when we're talking about close and intimate relationships with either our adult children, our parents, our partners, that type of thing, it takes more than money and things and physical safety to keep us connected. It really is the emotional piece. And so I would invite you to learn more, if you haven't already, about what's called CEN. And I know that nobody likes the word neglect, but it's childhood emotional neglect. And again, I just ask you to just get curious and come at it from the perspective of, oh, I wonder what this is about, without placing judgment for yourself on it, right? Just to learn what that means, because we can be there, and I've talked about this on previous episodes. We can give our kids everything under the sun. We can give them the best house and the best toys and the best clothes and buy them the best car and send them to the best college and send them, take them on the best vacations and all of these things. But if we're not connected emotionally, when conflict arises, it's easy to check out. It's really easy to check out. And I say easy, meaning, I don't mean that it's easy, because I know adult children it's not easy for them to walk away, but it's easier to maintain separation if someone doesn't feel emotionally safe. So just putting that out there. So how is conflict resolved? How do we move beyond this, right? And I think it's important to remember, you have to have two people engaged in order to have conflict resolution, for the most part. Let me rephrase that, to have healthy conflict resolution, right? So I think the emotional safety piece is paramount. And I think, my personal opinion is, I think that it's up to the parent to lead the way. This is what I did with my girls. I mean, again, I was very strict and my way or the highway when I parented my children. So it was up to me to be able to show them a different path and to let them see a different way for me to resolve conflict. And again, I recognize you can't resolve conflict if the other person won't participate. However, I still think there's value in really diving into and looking at how we deal with conflict individually, and then working on it within our relationships with other people, so that we get practice, so that when our children do come back, we are able to put it into practice with them with a little more ease than we would had we not had that experience. So I do think that there's value in doing it regardless of whether or not your children are there to resolve that particular conflict. And I think that the other piece is, as Dr. Coleman says, is moving from that manager role into the consultant role. Being curious, not directive, not giving our opinion, not telling them they're right or wrong, not those types of things. Being available to them if and when they want to engage with us, we're available, and then we can ask questions or provide statements that are not of opinion, right? And that these things help to build that emotional safety. And then the third thing for me is, choose your battles. Do you want to be right, or do you want to be connected to your estranged loved one? Sometimes it can come down to just that. There are things, even today, after having been reconciled with my children, because we are human, there are still things today that they do that I think, oh my God, oh my goodness, and I want desperately to give that motherly advice, and I don't. Because I don't want to go back into conflict with them. Because what I value more than giving my opinion or telling them how much they've hurt me or things like that is the connection and relationship. I value that more than the need for me to be expressive in my wants, needs, and desires. And I will say that I was only able to get to that place after years of therapy, where I was seen, heard, and validated by my therapist. And then I was able to do that for my children. Prior to therapy, I was not able to do that. I was engaging in conflict, and because I wanted to be seen, heard, and validated, I was really loud about it and got in everybody's face about it. Because what was running my show was my little girl inside saying, I want to be seen and heard, because she wasn't seen and heard as a child. And so that's what I was trying to do. And then when I was seen and heard, when my anger was validated, when my anger was witnessed, all of those things just reduced next to nothing. I no longer had this incessant need to put all of that on everybody else. That everyone else had to see and hear me and witness me and validate me and all of those things. I learned how to do part of that for myself, although I will say, I do think that is a purpose of being in relationship, it's a gift to be able to give to the other person that you're in relationship with, is to be able to see them, to hear them, and to validate them. And it just reduces the need to, like I said, to be big and loud about it. So those are my suggestions. I will link some things in the show notes that I pulled from my notes for today's episode, and I'm happy to share that with you for you to read additional ways of how to have healthy and what is a healthy response to conflict and what is an unhealthy response to conflict. For the most part, I think you can probably guess, most people can guess what those are. But these are the things that I have seen that have worked for me, that I see works for other parents, formerly estranged parents who are now reconciled. I see that they are coming into a healthy relationship with their adult children, and a large part of them are choosing their battles, right? They're not willing to stand on the hill, to die on the hill of I'm right and you're wrong. And they lay that weapon down. And they work really hard to provide a space for their children to feel like they can be emotionally safe with them. So those are again, to help build that emotional safety is to move from a manager's role into a consultant role. So, and this is like, if it's not something you've ever done before, you have to learn how to do it, right? You're right. We don't know what we don't know, but you can't go around using that as an excuse for the rest of your life, right? No, I didn't know how to resolve conflict in healthy ways with my children, and therefore I didn't teach that to them. However, I am taking responsibility today to course correct that. And I've learned how to have healthy conflict resolution. And I work hard at it. I'm not perfect. There are still times when, I elect not to talk to someone because of how emotionally unsafe I have felt. And I'm sure you've done the same thing on some level. That emotional connection feeds relationships. And we can feed it in healthy ways, or we can feed it in very unhealthy ways. So I hope that there's something in here that will be helpful for you in learning how to resolve conflict with your estranged adult children. And it begins with that first conversation, right? When they finally do open the door, or that it can begin with an amends letter. If they can receive that and open the door just a crack. It's really important to learn how to communicate. And the bulk of the work that I do with estranged parents is helping to teach them how to communicate, the use of language and how it's received, and how to communicate in ways that are healthy and can allow the door to be opened a little bit more on the end of the estranged adult child. So it's a learning curve. If you've never done it, you have to learn how. But taking that step and that interest in doing so is the first step. So this brings this episode to a close. I hope that this time together was time you feel well spent, and that you are able to find some takeaway nuggets to help you on your journey wherever you may be on your estrangement or reconciliation path. If you feel you've received something helpful or positive from this podcast, please consider following us, sharing this podcast with others, leaving a positive review, or becoming a financial supporter of the podcast. You can also follow us on social media, on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok under the same name, The Estranged Heart. And lastly, if you are an estranged parent or an estranged adult child and would like to have your story shared on the podcast, anonymously or not, please reach out via email to theestrangedheart@gmail.com. Until next time.